The night had barely given way to morning when Daniel pulled his truck into the far corner of the Walmart parking lot. He shut off the engine and let out a tired breath, the kind that carried the weight of too many overnight shifts. His fingers smelled faintly of cardboard and coffee, reminders of a long night hauling packages across town. For most people, the day was just beginning. For him, it was finally slowing down. Daniel reached for the paper cup of coffee sitting in the holder. It was lukewarm now, but he drank anyway. That cheap coffee was part of his routine, the small reward at the end of each shift before heading home. He always parked here for a few quiet minutes, where he could sit alone and think about his son. 10 years old, living with Daniel's parents until he could figure things out. He promised himself that someday he'd have a steadier job, a steadier life, a place where his boy wouldn't have to sleep in his grandparents' spare room. The parking lot was nearly empty at this hour, just a handful of cars left overnight, and a few early shoppers moving toward the sliding glass doors. The air was cool, sharp enough to keep him awake. He leaned back in his seat, letting the silence settle. For once there was no rush, no horn blaring behind him, no delivery schedule dictating his every move. And then he heard it. A car engine coughed, sputtered, and fell silent. He turned his head. Across the lot, not far from the grocery entrance, a black car sat motionless, a faint trail of steam lifting from under the hood. Behind the wheel was a young woman, tapping the steering wheel in frustration. Daniel watched as she picked up her phone, pressed it to her ear, and shook her head. Even from a distance he could see the worry written on her face. For a moment he debated looking away. He was bone tired and technically it wasn't his problem. But something made him linger. Maybe it was the way her shoulders slumped when the call ended, or maybe it was the small shape he noticed in the back seat, a child shifting restlessly. He set the empty cup aside, straightened up, and reached for the old toolbox he always kept behind the passenger seat. Something told him that this morning wasn't going to end the way he had planned. Daniel stepped out of his truck, the gravel crunching under his boots as he walked across the lot. The morning sun was still low, catching on the windshield of the stalled car. Up close, the picture was clearer. A woman in her late 20s sat behind the wheel, her blonde hair pulled back in a messy knot, her business jacket creased as if she had dressed in a hurry. Her fingers drummed anxiously on the steering wheel, then froze when she noticed him approaching. "Everything all right, ma'am?" Daniel asked, keeping his voice calm, the way you talk to someone who already has enough on their plate. The window slid down halfway. Up close, he saw the worry in her tired eyes. "It won't start," she said, her voice quick, clipped, as if she was trying not to let the panic show. "I called for a tow, but they said it could take over an hour, and it'll cost more than I can pay right now. I'm supposed to drop my daughter off at school and get to work." Daniel nodded, recognizing the edge of exhaustion behind her words. He had seen it before, on his own mother's face when she worked double shifts just to keep food on the table. "Mind if I take a look?" he asked gently. She hesitated, eyeing his worn jacket, the toolbox in his hand, the faint shadows under his eyes that said he wasn't here to cause trouble. After a beat, she gave a small nod. "Please, I don't know what else to do." As she stepped out of the car, Daniel caught sight of the little girl in the back seat. She couldn't have been more than 6. A pink backpack rested on her lap, and oversized sunglasses slid down her tiny nose, making her look like she was pretending to be a movie star. She studied him with wide, curious eyes, before pushing the glasses up and whispering something to her mum. "This is Emma," the woman said quickly, as if embarrassed to be introducing strangers in a parking lot. Daniel gave the girl a warm smile. "Nice to meet you, Emma. I'll do my best to get you two back on the road." The girl's lips curved into a grin. "You can fix cars?" He chuckled softly, kneeling to set down the toolbox. "I can try. My name's Daniel." "Sarah," the mother said, her voice softer now. Daniel popped the hood, the smell of overheated oil drifting up into the cool air. He could already tell it was something small, something fixable. But when he glanced back at Sarah, he saw the same expression he remembered from his own childhood. The silent calculation of money, the fear of what one more bill might mean. That look stayed with him. And just then Emma leaned out the window, her little voice carrying across the lot. "Mr. Daniel," she called, "please help my mum, she's really tired." Daniel propped the hood open and leaned over the engine. The heat hit his face, carrying that sharp, metallic smell of trouble. He wasn't a full-time mechanic, not anymore, but years of fixing his own old truck had taught him enough to get by. His hands moved carefully, testing the connections, checking the fluids. Behind him he heard Sarah pacing, the click of her heels on the pavement sharp against the morning quiet. "I can't be late again," she muttered under her breath. "My boss is already watching me too closely." Her voice carried the weight of someone who'd had to fight for every inch of stability, someone afraid that one bad morning could cost more than just a paycheck. Daniel straightened for a moment, wiping his palms on his jeans. "It's not as bad as it looks," he said, offering her a reassuring smile. "Just give me a few minutes." Sarah stopped pacing, her brow furrowing. "I really don't have the money for a big repair right now. I need to know before you—" He shook his head before she could finish. "Let me take a look first. We'll figure it out after." From the back seat, Emma had pushed her sunglasses up onto her head. She leaned forward, resting her chin on the top of the seat. "Do you fix cars for everybody?" she asked, her voice sweet and serious all at once. Daniel smiled faintly, his hands busy under the hood. "Only the special ones," he said. The little girl grinned, satisfied with his answer, and began humming to herself. The sound was soft, innocent, and for some reason, it tugged at something in him, a reminder of when his own son was that age, before life got messy and distances grew longer. A quick twist of the wrench, a check of the hose, and Daniel could already see the issue. It was something simple, easy enough to fix. He let out a breath, almost a laugh, and shook his head. He could tell her the truth right then, relieve her worry. But when he looked back and saw Sarah's hands clasped tightly together, her lips pressed thin in fear of what the cost might be, he decided against it. Instead, he said softly, "It's going to be okay." Daniel crouched low, bracing the hood open as the steam drifted out. His hands moved with quiet confidence, though inside he felt the sting of memory. He had been here before, not as the one holding the wrench, but as a boy standing next to his mother while she argued with a mechanic she couldn't afford. He could still see her clutching her worn purse, counting out singles and quarters with trembling fingers. That image had stayed with him his whole life. And now, looking at Sarah's tight shoulders and the way she chewed at her lip, it was like watching that memory play out all over again. "It's not too bad," he said over his shoulder, his voice calm. "I've seen worse." Sarah hovered nearby, arms crossed as if holding herself together. I need to know what I'm up against. I can't afford another big expense right now." Daniel tightened the clamp around the split hose, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes it looks worse than it is. This is one of those times, trust me." She let out a short, almost nervous laugh. "You sound too sure." He glanced up, offering a steady look. "Because I am." From inside the car, Emma had pulled her backpack open and was rummaging around. A few crayons rolled onto the seat and she quickly scooped them up. When Daniel looked her way, she grinned at him through the window, then bent down and started scribbling furiously on a scrap of paper. Daniel turned back to the engine, shaking his head with a smile. Kids had a way of making even the heaviest moments feel lighter. With a few more adjustments, he poured in fresh coolant and shut the hood with a solid thud. He wiped his hands on the rag and straightened, meeting Sarah's expectant eyes. "She'll run fine now," he said simply. Sarah's relief was instant, though the tension in her shoulders didn't fully disappear. She reached for her purse again. "Please, at least let me give you something." Daniel shook his head before she could finish. "Not today." Sarah hurried to her purse the second Daniel closed the hood. Relief softened her face, but her hands still trembled as she dug for her wallet. "Please, tell me how much," she said quickly. "I'll figure something out." Daniel shook his head firmly. "No charge." She froze. "What? I can't let you—" "It was a quick fix," he cut in gently. "I had the part, I had the time. Some things don't need a price tag." Sarah looked at him, uncertain, as if trying to decide whether he was being kind or condescending. Pride flickered in her eyes, but before she could argue further, a small voice interrupted. "Mom," Emma said, climbing out of the back seat with her pink backpack bouncing against her shoulder. In her hands, she clutched a piece of paper covered in colourful crayon strokes. She walked straight to Daniel and held it out. He crouched to her level, taking it carefully. At first, the drawing looked like the kind a 6-year-old might make. uneven lines, bold colours spilling past the edges. But then he noticed the details. A tall figure with dark hair standing beside a woman with blonde curls, and in the middle, a little girl with a pink bow. Above them, in shaky letters, she had written "Me, Mommy and Daddy." Mummy, and Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He glanced up at Sarah, who flushed instantly, her cheeks burning pink. "Emma," she murmured, half scolding, half embarrassed. That's not... Emma tilted her head, her eyes wide with innocence. "It's just a picture," she said simply. "I wanted to show him." Daniel swallowed hard, unable to find the right words. He hadn't expected something so simple to cut so deep. For a moment, all he could do was stare at that crayon family, feeling a mix of warmth and ache he hadn't felt in years. Sarah reached down, taking Emma's hand, clearly wanting to end the awkwardness. "Thank you for helping us," she said softly, almost whispering. "I don't know what we would have done without you." Daniel folded the drawing carefully, tucking it into his jacket pocket without thinking. He didn't want it to blow away, didn't want to lose it. Emma tugged on his sleeve. "You're coming tonight, right?" Daniel blinked. "Tonight?" She nodded eagerly. "My school play. Mom said you could come." Sarah looked mortified, shaking her head quickly. "Emma, he doesn't need to..." But Emma was already smiling up at him, waiting for his answer. The rest of Daniel's shift passed in a blur of deliveries and signatures, his body moving through the motions while his mind stayed elsewhere. Each time he slid a box onto a porch or nodded to a warehouse clerk, the folded crayon drawing in his pocket pressed against his chest, like a reminder he couldn't ignore. By the time the afternoon sun dipped low, fatigue settled heavy in his bones. His eyelids burned, his back ached, and the thought of going home to his quiet apartment sounded almost merciful. He could picture it already, reheated leftovers, a call to his parents to check on Tyler, then sleep until the next long night began. It was routine, safe, predictable. But when the red light caught him at an intersection, Daniel pulled the drawing out again. The waxy lines were shaky, the colours bright and uneven. A child's dream of a family. Me, Mommy and Daddy. He traced the letters with his thumb, and something inside him ached. He thought of Tyler, 10 years old now, probably finishing homework at his grandparents' kitchen table. Daniel had missed the school concerts, the birthday cupcakes in classrooms, the little moments that became big when you weren't there. The thought of another child searching the crowd for a face that never showed, it cut deep. And yet doubt gnawed at him. What if I go and it's a mistake? What if she thinks I'm stepping into something that isn't mine? He wasn't their family, he was just the tired truck driver who happened to be there when their car broke down. The light turned green. He didn't move. Cars honked behind him until he eased the truck forward, still lost in thought. By the time he stopped for gas on the edge of town, the decision weighed heavy on him. He filled the tank, staring at the numbers on the pump, and realised he was standing at a different kind of crossroad. He could go home, let the drawing sit in a drawer and forget. Or he could show up, if only to prove to himself, and maybe to Emma, that promises, spoken or not, mattered. He twisted the gas cap back on and slid into the driver's seat. The drawing lay on the passenger side now, bright against the worn fabric. For a moment he closed his eyes, then he started the engine. This time, he didn't head home. By the time Daniel pulled into the school parking lot, the sun was dipping low, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. He parked his truck at the far edge, suddenly self-conscious about how tired he looked in his work clothes. He had no flowers, no gift, nothing that parents usually carried to school events, just him, and the folded drawing tucked safely in his pocket. The gymnasium buzzed with noise when he stepped inside. Folding chairs lined up in uneven rows, parents finding their seats, teachers rushing kids behind the curtain. The air smelled faintly of popcorn from the concession stand. Daniel slipped into a seat near the back, hoping to go unnoticed. He wondered if he had made a mistake. He wasn't family, not really. He had no right to be here. He rubbed his palms together, debating whether to leave before it all began. And then he saw her. Emma peeked out from the side of the stage, her small face scanning the crowd. For a moment, her eyes darted left and right, searching. Daniel's chest tightened. He almost looked away, but then her gaze landed on him. Her whole face lit up. She waved, quick and eager, before disappearing behind the curtain again. It was such a simple gesture, but it rooted Daniel to his chair. He knew then he couldn't leave, not now. The lights dimmed, parents quieted, the curtain rose. Emma stepped onto the stage in a little paper crown, playing her part in a fairy tale about kindness and courage. She said her lines loudly, clearly, her small hands clasped in front of her, but halfway through she glanced toward the back row again. Her smile widened when she saw Daniel still there, watching. Something stirred in him. Pride, maybe, or a longing he hadn't let himself feel in years. He thought of Tyler, of all the times he had missed moments like this, and it stung. But tonight, at least, he hadn't let another child down. When the curtain finally fell and the applause filled the gym, Emma disappeared backstage with her classmates. Parents gathered their coats, chatting and laughing. Daniel stayed in his seat, uncertain whether to wait or slip out quietly. Before he could decide, a small hand tugged at his sleeve. "Come on," Emma whispered, her crown tilted crooked on her head. "Mum wants to talk to you." The diner's neon sign buzzed faintly above the door, throwing a soft red glow across the parking lot. Inside, the booths were cracked from years of use, and the menu taped to the wall looked like it hadn't been updated since the 90s. Sarah slid into a booth near the window with Emma beside her, crown still tilted on her head. Daniel hesitated before sitting across from them, suddenly aware of the grease stains on his jacket. A waitress with tired eyes poured coffee without asking, setting down 2 steaming mugs and a smaller glass of chocolate milk. "Fries'll be out in a minute," she said, already moving on. The smell of bacon and hash browns lingered in the air. For a moment no one spoke. Emma broke the silence first, dipping a crayon into her milk like it was a straw and giggling when Sarah quickly pulled it out. "Emma," her mum whispered, half laughing, half sighing. Daniel smiled despite himself. It was a small, ordinary thing, but it cracked the heaviness that had hung over them all day. "You were good tonight," he said, looking at Emma. "Best smile on that stage." Emma grinned wide, chocolate milk moustache across her lip. Sarah reached for a napkin to wipe her face, shaking her head with a kind of affection Daniel hadn't seen in a long time. After the food came, a plate of fries and 2 burgers split between them, Sarah finally spoke, her voice low. "I don't usually sit down with strangers like this, but after today, I just wanted to say thank you properly." "You don't owe me anything," Daniel said. She looked at him across the table, her tired eyes searching. "Maybe not. But people don't do what you did anymore, not unless they want something back." Daniel shifted, the truth pressing at him. "I grew up watching my mum scrape by. Sometimes the car breaking down was the thing that broke her. I promised myself if I ever had the chance to spare someone that feeling, I would." Sarah leaned back, her hand resting lightly on Emma's shoulder. "Some days I feel like I'm carrying the whole world on mine. One wrong turn, one bill too high, and it feels like it could all fall apart." Daniel nodded slowly. "I know that weight." Their eyes held for a moment, steady. And in that silence there was recognition. Not pity, not rescue, but the quiet understanding of 2 people who had both lived through the same kind of struggle. Emma slid another napkin across the table. This one had a fresh drawing, 3 stick figures sitting in a booth, one with a paper crown, one with long yellow hair, and one with dark hair and broad shoulders. She beamed proudly. Daniel picked it up, his throat tight. "See?" Emma said, her voice gentle. "It looks right." The diner had thinned out by then, the clatter of dishes fading as the night wore on. A few older men lingered at the counter, talking low over refilled coffee, but in their booth by the window it felt like the world had grown quiet. Emma leaned against her mum, eyelids drooping, but her little hand still clutched a crayon. She traced slow lines across the napkin, as if she couldn't stop drawing, even half asleep. Daniel watched her, smiling faintly, then caught himself. He looked away, staring into the dark beyond the glass. Sarah noticed. "You have kids?" she asked softly, not unkindly. Daniel nodded, his jaw tightening before he answered. "A boy, Tyler, he's 10, stays with my parents while I work. I don't see him as much as I should." Something flickered in her expression. Understanding, not pity. She knew what it was to feel torn in 2 directions. Emma stirred then, sitting up straighter, her crown slipping again. She looked at Daniel with a sudden seriousness that didn't fit her small frame. "You know what I wish?" Daniel blinked. "What's that?" She leaned closer, lowering her voice like it was a secret meant only for him. "I wish you could be my dad." The words hit harder than he expected. For a second, he couldn't breathe. He glanced at Sarah, who froze, caught off guard, her hand tightening around Emma's shoulder. "Emma," Sarah began, her cheeks flushed. "That's not—" But the little girl pressed on, eyes steady on Daniel. "You're kind. You fixed our car. You came to my play. That's what dads do." The silence that followed felt heavy, fragile. Daniel swallowed hard, the napkin crinkling in his hands. He wanted to say something to soften the weight of her words, but nothing came out. Sarah exhaled slowly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, meeting Daniel's eyes. She doesn't mean—" But Emma interrupted again, her small voice sure and unwavering. "Yes, I do." For a moment, Daniel saw his own son's face in hers. The same hope, the same need for someone steady. His heart ached with the truth of it. He had walked into their morning by chance, but nothing about this felt like chance anymore. He looked at Emma, then at Sarah. And in that fragile moment, Daniel knew his world had shifted in a way he couldn't easily step back from. Emma had fallen asleep against her mother by the time the check arrived, her little crown slipping sideways, her crayons scattered across the booth. Sarah brushed her daughter's hair back and smiled softly, but her eyes carried the same weight Daniel had seen all day. When the waitress laid the bill down, Daniel reached for it before Sarah could. "Let me cover this," he said quietly. "It's easier that way." Sarah hesitated, pride flickering across her face, then gave a small nod. "Thank you, for all of it." They stepped outside into the cool night. The street lamp above buzzed faintly, casting a warm glow across the lot. Daniel walked them to their car, hands shoved into his jacket pockets. Sarah opened the back door carefully, settling Emma into her seat. The little girl stirred just long enough to mumble, "Good night, Mr. Daniel," before drifting back into dreams. Sarah closed the door and turned to him. For the first time that day, there was no guarded wall in her expression, just gratitude, quiet and real. "She'll remember tonight," she said softly. "So will I." Daniel nodded. "Me too." They stood there for a beat longer, as if neither wanted the moment to end, until finally Sarah slipped into the driver's seat and started the engine. He stayed where he was, watching the car's taillights fade into the distance. The lot grew quiet again, just as it had that morning, but Daniel knew he wasn't the same man who had pulled in for a cup of coffee hours ago. He climbed back into his truck and sat for a while, the folded drawings Emma had given him still tucked safely inside his jacket. His phone buzzed on the dashboard, a message from his mom. "Tyler finished his homework early tonight, wants to show you tomorrow." Daniel stared at the words, then smiled faintly. He picked up the phone, typed back, "I'll be there, promise." He slipped the phone down, unfolded Emma's crayon picture, and set it on the passenger seat. The uneven lines glowed faintly under the dash light, a family drawn the way she dreamed it. Daniel leaned back, looking through the windshield at the scatter of stars above. For the first time in years, the heaviness in his chest loosened. Life was still messy, still uncertain, but tonight had reminded him of something he had almost forgotten, that even small moments could change the direction of a life. And sometimes, he thought, a child's wish was enough to show a man the way forward. Lesson. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change the course of someone's life. And sometimes a child's simple wish is enough to remind us of the family, love, and hope we still deserve. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this story. I'm truly grateful for that. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I'll see you again soon, right here on Rain Inside.